Hey everybody, welcome back to Eggs. This week's guest is Brian Gill. Brian is a computer scientist, entrepreneur, and angel investor who currently serves as chairman of Gillware Digital Forensics, a firm which provides cyber risk assessments, data recovery, incidents response, and digital forensic services. He's also co-founder of the Phoenix Nuclear Labs, where he has served on their board from inception to when the company spun off Shine Medical Technologies. Those two companies combined have raised over $100 million of venture capital and employ hundreds of people in Wisconsin. Here to talk about cybersecurity, angel investing, and so much more is our guest, Brian Gill. Hey, Brian, how are you, man?
Ryan, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
So thrilled. Yeah, we really appreciate it, especially in this sort of post-COVID world. We're, I think, extra grateful of everybody's time. I don't know if the experience is the same for everybody, but almost everybody I know is more busy now than they've ever been, just in trying to figure out how to do all this work from home and everything else. And we're really grateful for your time. Yeah,
well, I am super busy and descending into madness like everybody else. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for making time for us. Really appreciate it.
Yep. So cool. So let's just start, I guess, kind of at the top. Let's talk a little bit about who you are, where you come from, what your background consists of, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, computer nerd, big time from kind of off the jump. You know, for some perspective, I was writing my first computer programs when I was about 8 or 9 years old. So definitely not the captain of the football team. I was on the very nerdy mathematical end of the spectrum, and got my computer science degree from University of Wisconsin right at the height, or right before the height of that first internet boom back in like 98. And I started to work for some traditional companies around Wisconsin, and then quickly said, this is not for me. Jumped on a plane, went out to Startup California, and definitely had a lot of fun, learned a lot, made some money, but most of the ventures that I was a part of out there kind of imploded when the NASDAQ imploded, and all the pets.com type companies all cratered.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be hard relocating and then having everything come crashing down.
Well, I really had gotten a foothold. I had leveled up my software architecture game and my kind of startup mentality, my business acumen. I was really starting to come into my own in my early 20s, and then the earth exploded, much like it's probably happening to a whole bunch of people in their early 20s right now. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to quite a few of my mentors out there, and, the theory was that it was going to take maybe 5 to 7 years before the startup game really kicked off again. And, I didn't have love for California to actually live there for 5 to 7 years and kind of wait that out until the venture capital and the angel investing community were going to be kind of ready to invest again. So at the same time, my entrepreneurial spirit was not broken, and I wanted to start a company. But long story short, came to Wisconsin, came back home, where things are 20% the cost of everything in California, where you could rent an office for, $5 a foot instead of $500 a foot. And, it was a good decision in retrospect. A lot of good things happened.
What was your first, your first venture as a startup? Like what, it's always hard to kind of just go from nothing to, hey, I'm doing this and let's go full tilt. What was that for you? And can you kind of walk us through that process?
Well, I had a bunch of kind of false starts, where you learn a lot about yourself, when you break those down into, okay, why didn't this go anywhere? We had a good idea. Why didn't this go anywhere? Me and a couple of buddies, and this is, even when I was in college, so, 25-ish years ago, me and a couple of buddies wanted to do a kind of a e-commerce platform for lawyers, where we would try to get all these lawyers to sign up and basically be on a business index and answer basic questions. And, it was a good idea. There wasn't anything really like it at the time. And we got maybe a couple hundred lawyers to kind of sign up to it. And then it just kind of died on the vine and never really went anywhere. And A lot of that had to do with us being in school.
Okay. I was going to ask if you thought that was more on your end or that the people that you were designing it for just didn't really like it.
We had good response, and the lawyers were quick to sign up. But at the same time, like the hit rate, we didn't know enough about business. So like we started like a direct mail campaign and sent direct mail to like a couple thousand lawyers because that's basically what we could afford. And we ended up getting almost like 15% of them came and signed up to the platform.
Oh, that's a good return.
Yeah, that's really a good return. You don't see that
we
very often.
We thought it was bad. Mail. We thought it wasn't good. We're like, oh, geez, only like 10 or 15 out of 100 are interested. I guess maybe this idea kind of sucks.
Yeah, well, when your average rate is 2% or less, that's pretty darn good.
You don't know that when you're 18 years old.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, geez, every lawyer who gets this is going to say like, oh, it's free and I can get more business and I could be one of the first lawyers on this platform. I thought everybody would do it. I thought it was going to be 100% or 90%. So when we saw 15, we're like, oh, God. And then again, we didn't have, it wasn't actually like an incorporated business. We didn't, there was just kind of a loose grouping of people. And we didn't really have accountability for who was going to do what. And me and my main business partner were both programmers. So we had overlapping skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then finals and classes and, co-ops and internships. And, then you look back and it's like, oh, that was a pretty good idea. Oh, well. So, I've done that like 8 times before we finally started, Gillware, which was a company. That was the first time where I had good business partners who really complemented my skill sets. And we had like kind of a natural teamwork and accountability, and we were kind of accountable to each other. And really that business every week was just a little bit further along and a little bit further along. And, it's been almost 18 years now and, I'm still running it. I still love it.
Was Gillware pre your move to Silicon Valley or post?
Post.
Okay.
So that was when, the world, the economy had kicked everybody square in the jewels. And I came back to Wisconsin. I needed a job. I was working I was a high-end consultant doing kind of IT consulting and programming for like insurance companies, cheese factories, all kinds of weird stuff. And again, like if you had told me 5 years or 6 years before that, how much money I'd be making doing that stuff and that I'd be miserable, I would be as surprised as anybody. I was making a very healthy living in kind of a crappy economy as a young man without a bunch of costs. And it was going fantastic for everybody but me. You
just didn't enjoy the job, or what about it didn't you like?
Well, again, when you're a consultant and they're paying you, over $100 an hour or sometimes over $300 an hour for your time, boy, do they have a very specific skill set that they've hired you for. They are not going to let you, they're not interested in anything else.
Right.
Because they're paying such a huge,
yeah.
They're paying such a huge premium for my Java software architecture experience. And they're they're not all that interested that I think this particular service sucks or the way they are, the business process could be dramatically improved and made 100% more efficient.
Yeah, no, it's true what you're saying about, sort of what they look for when you start hiring consultants. It's true that the focus gets very narrow. And so unless you're brought in as a systems analyst or somebody who's supposed to be looking at those kinds of problems, they're counting every hour you're billing them and they're saying, well, that's not related. Why are you doing this? So
right.
That's a thing, but it's really interesting because you wouldn't discover it until you were, knee deep in it already.
Well, no. And I worked at one of these big places and we had, day one, I sat down and they handed me about a 80-page specification. And that it detailed about 50 web pages to do this one certain task. And I read through it and I was like, oh God, this is bad. And I basically could accomplish everything for the business that they were trying to accomplish in a much more automated way with about 3 pages and some email reports. And it wouldn't be a 6-month project. I'd get it done in probably a week and a half. So that's what I did. And the business unit, when they got it, they loved it. The business unit was like, holy crap. You mean we don't have to log into this thing and surf through all this stuff every day and look for these opportunities to move some of these supply chain things from warehouse A to warehouse B because some cheese is going to expire or something. So like, hey, let's get this cheese down to Memphis where the pizza place is because it's going to go bad and we're going to throw it in the garbage. So the business unit loved it and my bosses hated it.
Why? What was the breakdown between the two?
They wrote the spec.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they wanted you to,
They were happy to let you take 6 months on this thing. That made for a better engagement.
Well, yeah. And it makes people look bad when you accomplish something in a couple of weeks instead of a couple of months. Yeah. Because then the business unit might think, well, geez, what else are you wrong about?
So you went from the consultant side to start Gillware. What changed when you did that? Why? Well, obviously you're the boss, but I mean, like what dynamic of the, instead of being a consultant to being the company, how did that change between you and your clients? Well, I mean, so for me, my last gig was at a big insurance company and I had a great relationship with the manager of the business unit that I worked for. And I tended to get all my work done, usually kind of dramatically in shorter time periods than they had projected. And then I would spend quite a bit of my time just mentoring some of their full-time employees. So adding some value, but there really wasn't 40 hours a week to do that. So if I was going to be in the building billing for 40 hours, they needed to get me either some more stuff to do, but I had kind of pushed that limit. So, and I also just wasn't going to sit there and surf the internet because a lot of people would say, oh, just sit there and surf the internet for 10 hours. I can't do that. It's, I can appreciate people that can, but when I'm at work and I need to get stuff done. And whether it's for my company or somebody else's company, or whether I was mopping a floor at a candy plant, like I had to mop that freaking floor and I had to get it done and it had to be clean because that's why I was there. And I couldn't just sit there and stare off into the ether. I'm just not wired that way. I'm pretty tightly wound. And, but anyways, it was great because I just started working less and everybody loved that except for my consulting company. Who, there's a sales guy that got me this gig and I'm slated for 40 to 50 hours a week and I'm giving them 22. And they had a huge problem with that. Of course they would. They were earning half the revenue that they should have made. But again, it's like, well, you can have 22 or you can have 0, and I don't really care what you want to do here, guys. Yeah. And they decided to continue. So for the first 3 or 4 months of Gillware, I had a kind of a half-time job at an insurance company and a half-time job. Well, actually like a full-time job at starting my own, data recovery business. And my brother, Tyler, who actually thought up the idea for this business, he was in his sophomore year at University of Wisconsin in computer science. And so he was kind of having some of those same type of troubles that I was having where, boy, it's hard to do both. It's hard to go to school in a really challenging program that might take 60, 70 hours a week and then also start a business and be good at either one of them. So he dropped out of school. I ended up quitting that gig as soon as we started to see, okay, we can make a living doing this. This can be what we do. And we hired another guy who's a buddy of ours, a genius. His name was Greg Pfeiffer. And he's the guy that figured out all of the engineering and all of the procedures that we need to do to make money. So what the company does and still does is people have data, they didn't back it up, or those backups were incomplete or stale or mitigated by a criminal. And that data is basically gone because either a server has crashed, an iPhone went in the ocean, a little memory card on a wedding shoot just dies during the shoot.
all of these things and more. Anything that had data where now it doesn't, or that data is inaccessible, people ship it to us. They ship us airbags from cars that were in, or even from big trucks that were in crashes. And that airbag module contains all of that kind of flight recorder information.
Really?
All that black box. Oh yeah.
In an airbag in a car, it's got the.
Yeah. So
I had no clue.
and it makes sense because that airbag needs to know when to fire.
Okay.
All of that criteria for, okay, I better fire this airbag or somebody's going to die. And I better not fire this airbag if somebody's not going to die, because the airbag itself is dangerous, right? So all of that acceleration, deceleration, crumple zone, all of that information goes in. Is it a side impact? Is it a front impact? All of that information leading up to that moment is captured.
Huh.
And it lives on a stupid little chip. And it's not for crash reconstruction. It's not for criminal or civil litigation. That's not what it's for. It's for, should I fire this airbag?
Mm-hmm.
And it's always 30 milliseconds away from firing that airbag. As you're driving around, it's waiting. Its whole life, it's waiting. And as soon as that criteria is met, bang, it's going to fire. So usually these crash reconstruction guys can pull that airbag and hook up to it and read that data. But sometimes there's a fire. So, there's a big crash, there's a big fire, and that airbag module is burnt to a crisp. But the chip isn't. The chip is still readable usually. So again, like if it had data on it, people ship it to us because they want it back. And sometimes it's consumers, and sometimes it's the highest levels of the federal government.
So that's like, it's called digital forensics, right? Essentially.
Well, yeah. So Gillware is a little complicated over the years. And again, even my intro is just a tad out of date. So Gillware over the years, it started as the data recovery lab. And then we moved into backup, because the very first question everybody had, who was our recovery customer, is how could I have prevented this? What should I be doing? Like 100% of our customers would ask us, like, okay, I just paid you guys a ton of money to get my own stuff back. What am I doing wrong? And there was a lot of different reasons that happened, but we started a backup company. And in 2016, we sold that to an organization called StorageCraft, which is one of the world's biggest backup companies out of Draper, Utah. And at that same time in 2016, we officially started a company called Gillware Digital Forensics. So we partnered up with this world thought leader in digital forensics named Cindy Murphy. She is literally like keynote speaker at forensic conferences. She's taught thousands of digital forensics people how to do it. She was a member of the SANS Institute, which is the worldwide governing body. And she just happened to live in our backyard here in Madison. And we knew her pretty good over the years, because people from all over the country, when they bumped into strange situations, would always reach out to her. And a subset of those strange informations are, well, I'm trying to catch this child predator, and we caught him, and he took a hammer to his hard drive.
Well, how do you recover a hard drive like that? How do you recover, the fire, car accident, or, you would think that would, I used to work in a security field where we would actually punch holes in hard drives. We had a machine that we'd do it with. And once that happens, is there a way to actually still pull that off? Okay.
So in general, to answer your question, it involves mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, physicists, computer scientists who reverse engineer how the heck that thing worked in the first place, and then apply that knowledge to try to overcome whatever maladies happen to become it. I will tell you that taking a drill press through the platters of a hard drive will do a great job of pretty much mitigating what we can do. It's going to make the cost of getting at that data very, very, very expensive. Okay. And obviously some of that data will not be recovered because it's gone. Physically, It's not there anymore, right? But the rest of that platter is still there. Now, it might be a little warped. It might be that the magnetic substrate is peeled up a little bit. And it very well could be that it's impossible, but it's not really impossible. Given a budget of more than $1 million, you could get a whole bunch of data off that thing.
That's crazy.
But how often is that budget going to be brought to bear? Very, very, very infrequently. Right?
Yeah, I suppose it would have to be pretty seriously important data.
It would have to be
bother
like
doing
from Osama bin Laden's cave when he was still alive, is the type of thing that, and we bump into issues like that. Like with that San Bernardino shooting, there was an iPhone. That was an iPhone 6, and it was encrypted, and it was locked down. And Apple had spent tens of millions of dollars trying to design a secure phone where if you're not that dude, you don't get into this phone, right? Everything's encrypted. The authentication mechanism was pretty bulletproof, and they had on purpose built 0 backdoors so that they could not be compelled to lend any assistance. And in fact, they were, not helpful with the federal government when they wanted to get that San Bernardino shooter's phone.
Well, it's almost like setting a precedent, though. If they do it for that once, now it opens doors for future.
Oh, I support what Apple's perspective is, 100%. I rock an iPhone myself because I appreciate, as a computer scientist, as a security guy, I want my vendors to be as secure and as bulletproof as possible. And I don't want them to build any of those backdoors because they will definitely get repurposed by the bad guys someday. For sure. So I'm with Apple. But again, this is kind of like the platter drill. That was an extreme situation. They got the data off the phone. And it took dozens of engineers, hundreds and hundreds of hours, and 3 or 4 months later, they got it.
So now once they've done that initially and they set up a procedure, can they replicate it?
They can't until Apple patches their operating system.
Okay.
And they come out with the new iPhone 8.
True.
So there's always this cat and mouse game with storage providers, computing device providers.
So on a more balanced level, like someone like me, for example, who doesn't take a drill press to my hard drive, but it's just got the clicking and the it crashed. Is that fairly expensive to recover, or is it somewhat affordable?
Well, I mean, so in general, when we're looking at a clicking hard drive, it's usually got a failure of the magnetic head stack. And again, people don't know how complicated this stupid stuff is. I mean, it's basically what's supposed to happen is the read head is supposed to fly about 15 nanometers above the platter on a cushion of air generated by the spin. And there's some electricity that runs through a little copper winding. It creates a magnetic field. It interacts with a different magnetic field of the magnet. And that's what lets you move the arm around. And what you're hoping to do is kind of catch those magnetic train tracks where your ones and zeros of your, recipes lie or whatever.
Sure.
And that's what happens when it works properly. When it's magnetically blind, because one of those heads has an electrical short or something, or maybe it's a little bent or it's worn, it's going to flap around stupidly because it can't catch those servos. And that's what that clicking noise is. So we can, on average, recover a clicking hard drive's data for about $1,000. So It could be cheaper if we get super lucky and the platters are pristine and it's kind of a cheap unit where we could buy replacement head stacks for $50. It might be as little as $500.
I've got a hard drive from college that has all of my portfolio work on it, hours and hours and hours of work, and it crashed right after I left. And I've thought about sending it in.
Send it in, baby.
I might have to.
No, you send it in. I'll take care of you.
I appreciate that.
You wouldn't believe how many times I meet people at an airport or whatever, and they have that same story.
Yeah.
And they send it in and I take care of them. But on the flip side, I don't want your clients or anybody listening to think, oh, it's $500. So if you send in like an 8 terabyte helium filled drive where, the top has basically been kind of almost spot welded on.
Yeah.
There's no screws because they can't have those helium atoms escaping. And it's clicking with like a little bit of platter damage. And the replacement head stack is like $400. you might get a quote from us for like $3,000. And it's not because we're jerks.
It's just the cost of doing business.
It's all the costs of all the infrastructure, the training, the professionals, their time, the clean room bench time, that bench's certifications, and then the parts and the risks and so again, it's in general, is it expensive? I guess.
It depends on the data that's on it though. I mean,
yeah.
Okay. So Gillware, you started that. How long were you doing that before you guys got acquired?
So we started Gillware kind of in 2003, officially incorporated the business in 2004. Because again, I'm not a business lawyer. So we might have run the business for a little bit, kind of unincorporated. In 2006, we partnered up with a couple other buddies of mine. One guy named Steve Clementi, who's a badass computer scientist, probably the best programmer. I mean, I've met at this point probably 2,000 or 3,000 programmers that I've kind of worked professionally with. Dude is number one, the best, incredible. And he architected the data services, server-side software that grabbed all the data from everybody, kept it safe, kept it encrypted, kept it sorted, and the client-side software that plugged seamlessly into the kernel of your operating system so you didn't have to do anything. That was the beauty of our product, is you didn't really have to configure it. You could just install it, and it knew your QuickBooks files and your portfolio was important, and it knew that those temporary internet files weren't. And it would just back up the important stuff without you thinking. So we started that business in 2006, and that business got acquired in 2016. So it took us 10 years to sell that business. And in 2016, we started the forensics business, which a couple months ago, we took a round of venture capital and renamed that company to be Tetra Defense. And Tetra Defense is, we're up to about 50 employees over there now. It's about, again, 4 years old at this time, and it's accelerating fast. That business does two things. It helps people out of data breach situations, and not really people. Sorry, guys. It really helps businesses out of data breach situations. So, everyone's seen these things in the news where company XYZ got held ransom for their own data.
Yeah.
So ransomware response or incident response is a big part of what they do over there. And you might sense kind of a theme about how we all think over here is almost everybody's like, hey, I just got breached. I had all my data encrypted. I just paid some random criminal a whole bunch of money for my own data back. What should I do? What am I doing wrong? It's a very, very, very common question that we usually already know most of the answer to as part of resolving that problem. Because part of that resolution is getting the bad guys off the network sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
These are live fire incidents that are going on, and we need to get these guys out of the building. And as part of that, we can usually see, this is how they got in. And then we also saw a whole bunch of other problems like, well, they could have got in this way or this way or this way. So then a lot of these companies are starting to hire us for more proactive risk assessment services over time, where, we don't really compete with our internal IT staff. Our job is to kind of report to the C-level executives and let them know about their security posture, where they should be spending their money, where they should be prioritizing, but not really doing much of it. We're not.
You're just a consultant for the most part.
Yeah. Because again, everybody knows they want to get more secure, but there's a lot of variance. And what the hell does that mean?
Yeah. Is Norton going to do its job?
Well, and again, that's a very common thing. Some people think, well, I thought I was good because I ran Norton. Nothing against Norton, but there's a very specific set of problems that these AV or antivirus solutions are built to deal with. Most of these ransomware situations are not virus related. They had nothing to do with a computer virus.
Link on an email for the most part.
They usually, that can happen, and that they can get in that way sometimes, but it's usually a user authentication problem. So somebody got phished. So somebody.
Yeah, maybe let's take just like a little step backwards. I think this is a really good subject to dig into, but I wonder if we could just maybe set some kind of ground level definitions for these things. So when you're talking about digital forensics, basically it's all of these things, right? This data recovery, it's, the security protocol and checking for holes in their systems and that kind of stuff. Would you say that sort of covers, like digital forensics sort of includes all of that stuff? Or is it really more on the recovery side?
I mean, digital forensics is really it's the science of data, and it can be useful for things like criminal investigations. It can be utilized for things like data breaches, for how did this happen? It's the Sherlock Holmes work. It's the investigative work of what the hell happened here. It could be a crashed airbag reconstruction situation.
Okay.
Right.
So, and then moving forward from there to just, what we were just talking about is we were talking about data breaches, how to prevent them, that kind of things. You're right. You mentioned we see so many of these things on the news and you're always hearing about these data breaches, but what does that actually mean? So is somebody actually just, they got a username and password and they got into your system? Or, is there movie style hacking going on? Or what does an actual data breach look like, or what does a data breach consist of?
It's definitely not movie style hacking. I have yet to see a movie where, remember Swordfish?
Yeah.
I don't know. Almost. You guys saw Swordfish? I think it was just the three of us.
Probably.
But they got like Hugh Jackman and he's playing the techno music and he's typing really fast.
Yeah.
That shit. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
It's usually not that. It's also not the 16-year-old plebe kid anymore.
Yeah.
These modern hackers are criminal syndicates. It's more like Tony Soprano style. Okay. This is organized crime. This is a criminal syndicate. And when we're on the incident response side of things, we see the same syndicates over and over and over again. And we don't always know it's the same guy or the same group at the time. Sometimes it takes a little while. And then we're like, oh, okay, this is the 17th time we've seen that. This is the 12th time they've used that same cryptocurrency wallet, or they've used that similar email address, or the software that they used renamed the extensions to be the similar thing. So it takes time to figure out that it's this organized situation, but it is.
Well, and I think that's good to know. Oh, sorry, Mike.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say. All right, you go ahead, Mike. I'm done talking.
I was just going to ask, what do you do when you find that syndicate? Is there any way to actually do anything to them? I mean, like the FTC aren't they starting to impose fines on data breaches? And if you get hacked, then they can come after you. I'm looking at a list of 30 different major companies that got hacked this year.
Oh, yeah.
One of them was Facebook. They had 267 million Facebook profiles have been listed for sale on the dark web for 6 months.
Well, no, like Jeff Bezos's phone got hacked like 5 months ago, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's getting hacked.
Yeah. Well,
if you're a big enough target, you're going to get hacked. So
yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think sort of the vision in people's head, is that there's this individual on the other end who's hacking you. But I guess, so it's really interesting, this idea of the syndicates, these larger format groups where they've built software, they've done whatever they've done so that they can begin, accessing profiles or stealing data, on large scale. Because I think when you think of somebody having been hacked or, somebody got into my Facebook account or whatever, you always think that there's some individual on the other end who's, this, I don't know, nasty criminal in mom's basement that's hacking our stuff. But it's interesting that it's actually a much bigger thing than that. And it makes total sense that it would.
And there's a whole ecosystem. It's even more complicated than just one syndicate. So there's a whole bunch. This is a pretty wide topic here, but a couple things are going on. So some of the tools that the criminals will use to breach into these systems came from kind of white hat or gray hat things. So you might have a government like the US government who might invest a bunch of money for the CIA or somebody else to be able to hack into a bunch of these systems. And then sometimes that stuff from that US or Israeli government or even some other governments ends up in the wild. Like the actual hacking kits that some federal government spent tens of millions of dollars to build. Sometimes, oops, the bad guys get it.
Yeah.
And then they start to build. So there's all these ecosystem guys that build the tools, that they don't do any of the hacks. They don't ransom anybody. They are the tool builders.
Mhm.
And then there's people out there that only do the breach side. They specialize in the social engineering, or they have some methodology they use to get access to one of these network ecosystems. And then they go on the dark web, or they call up a couple of their buddies and they sell that intrusion. And then again, they don't do the breach, or they kind of did the breach, but they're not going to steal the data. They're not going to perform the ransom. That's somebody else, right? So there's this whole network of criminals that all kind of work together in conjunction, and they've all got different skill sets and different levels of ability and different targets. And then to answer, the earlier question, we've got a situation where what can we do about it? And well, geez, I'm hearing that there's all these industries that are starting to bring some fines and start to bring some teeth to some of this legislation. And again, that's part of the solution for sure. And again, there's a lot of people, including our own president, who are like, regulation's bad. I hate regulations. They're the enemy of whatever. But the reality is, it's hard to get companies to spend money on IT.
Yeah.
It's hard to get companies to spend some money on IT security until they get burned really, really bad. Then they're all about it, but it's way too late, right? And there's hundreds of millions of Americans' privacy at stake here, and bank accounts at stake, and people make their living. And again, it's their medical records need to be kept safe. So you need to have regulations, and those regulations need to have teeth. And this is starting to come in even to the private sector. So if you're a sub-vendor of a bigger company and you're going to have any access to their data or their systems, or you're going to be touching it in any way, shape, or form, a lot of times these big companies are telling these small vendors, okay, like I need to see these 18 documents that describe all of your cybersecurity. And it's slowly but surely going to be required to be in any kind of serious business. And the federal government just came out with this thing called the CMMC, where if you're going to be in that Department of Defense supply chain, you need to have this CMMC level certification. And there's 5 different levels. They just published the spec maybe 12 weeks ago. And this is going to have some teeth. There's going to be auditors. There's going to be audit periods. And if you're making the washer or a bolt for a submarine, you're going to have to be at some point CMMC certified. So there's all kinds. There's about 300,000 companies in America that are in that supply chain.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Some of them are really small. Some of them are one dude.
Yeah.
And they're going to have a hard time with a lot of this.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, even, in my line of work, I mean, we do just advertising and marketing services, but one of our clients is a big national global health insurance company. And we have to go through annual training. We have to use a machine that was set up, like a laptop that was set up and put together, has all the security protocol and everything on their end. We're not allowed to work on their work on any other machine. It's got to all be done through this one that they can control and all this stuff, and we're just, I personally work on that account, from our team. And, but it's for that same reason, but they're really trying to protect, the data of their insured,
Yep. And so that's your first taste of it, Ryan.
Yeah.
10 years from now, every customer is going to be like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it makes sense, right? I mean, especially if you're dealing with anything proprietary, when it, whether it's IP or personal information or, anything, whatever it is, if it's something that, could be construed as, needing to be protected or owned by an organization, of course, they're going to have things in place to protect it.
Well,
Yeah.
I've actually heard that security professionals in the IT world is actually one of the most in-demand jobs out there right now. As far as like they can't hire enough people because
it's too late. I mean, it's out in Israel, they've got a really good system for this. The Israeli kids, even when they're in elementary school, they get earmarked early. If I lived in Israel when I was growing up, I would have got earmarked as, okay, this kid is good with math. He's good with languages. They would have given me some little programming tasks. I would have knocked them out of the park, and I would have gotten put into a program for that, even as early as, third, fourth grade. And they've been doing this for a little while. So some of the best security folks in the world come out of Israel right now. I would love to see us do something very similar in this country, but it's going to be 5-10 years before we really start to reap the benefits of it.
Do you think that's just a breakdown in the education system?
Well, as a parent with 3 kids at home right now,
yes.
I love my teachers, and when they were in school, my kids were getting a pretty good education, but it's certainly not, there's no level of, my kids are in public school, and they're not getting a lot of personalized curriculum.
Yeah, I think some of it has to do with just, sort of the inherent freedom, quote unquote, freedom of being an American and being allowed to choose your own path. I know of other countries too, and I don't know if it's still the same, but I know like Germany, for example, would sort of earmark kids that were set up to be more engineering focused and put them down a track that was more engineering focused. And if you were more maybe academic or, domestic, or maybe better at, doing, working in a factory or something, they might steer you down that road. And so there was a little bit of this selection going on early on. And I don't know, that seems a little counter sort of traditional American, but I think you're right. In order to stay competitive, you've got to identify these people early and get them working on it so that you down the road have people with the appropriate skills. I imagine, especially in tech security, as quickly as it changes, if you're not even going to start learning this stuff until college, you're so far behind the curve that, it's very difficult to come out and start out very high level.
Well, that was actually my next question. Can someone who's in their 40s or, older in life jump into this career and actually make a career out of it? Or do you have to start young?
If you have an IT background, I would say the answer is a solid 100% yes. And if I was an IT generalist right now, boy, this is 100% where I'd be taking my career, even in my 40s, even my early 50s, because we don't know what the devices are going to be. We don't know what the trends are going to be. We're not 100% sure what this cloud's going to look like. We don't know what 7G is going to look like. There's all kinds of stuff we don't know. There's definitely going to be bad guys trying to break in and steal data. Period. Yeah. So there is always going to be a job in playing this type of defense. So certainly, I think the answer is yes. Now, again, there are these very technical jobs, like the guy or the gal who's in charge of configuring the multi-factor authentication on that firewall. Yeah, that person has probably got an IT background, and that person probably went through 6 months of training to get to that point where they're like a junior person in that type of networking, right? And they probably had a 2-year to a 4-year education in networking, and they probably got their CCNA or whatever. And that person is the type of person that usually sets up the networks that get breached, by the way.
Right.
So, it takes another probably 5 years being mentored by people who are at that next level above them, where they can really understand what it means to harden a network.
Yeah, I think even just in my own experience, I happen to be the right age where I lived half of my life without the internet and the other half with it. And, I know that just as a young person, when I wanted to get online or if I wanted to have a website, I had to build it. And back then you didn't have, Squarespace or whoever. You had to learn a little bit of code, And so I had, as a younger person, maybe 13, 14 years old, started learning some programming languages. It wasn't ever going to be a career path for me, but just to be on the internet, you had to understand a little bit of it. And I find now that stuff still serves me really well as I'm working with clients or developing UI projects or, speaking with developers who are doing a project that we've designed or something. Just being able to have a foundational understanding of what they're working with and just kind of understand what it is, versus, I don't know every technical detail. I'm not going to sit down and write the code, but I can read through the code well enough to say, oh, well, this might be the problem, or this is linking to the wrong thing, or, that kind of thing. And I think having that foundational knowledge, I think, is what you're talking about here too, is it's not that you can't learn things as an older person. It's just that in order for you to really excel in a career, you need this foundational core. And it just takes so long to learn the foundational core that if you're starting into this at 50 years old, you might be a little behind the curve.
For me, it's all about when it becomes not magic. Like when I wrote my first computer program and like the compiler is not working and it's giving me these compile errors and I've never seen this error before and it's like super frustrating and what's going on. And, a couple months in, you're like, oh, that error means I did this stupid thing that I'm prone to do. And then it starts to become less and less magical. And when you go to get like a real computer science degree and you actually write your first compiler, and you invent your first language, and then you figure out all this gets turned into these opcodes that get sent to this CPU that's doing all the different mathematics to make all this happen, then it really starts to become incredibly unmagical. It's just a machine like any other. And certainly those types of foundations really, really help. But there's also, when it comes to this security stuff, there's definitely jobs that you don't have to be in the trenches, really, really low level, doing all these little things. That there's definitely, I think, a role for people who sit as project managers who can say, okay, I've got this list of 38 criteria that my business needs to get better at so that we can fulfill this like 118 question CMMC certification. So it's not always the security specialists that are managing those projects and doing that paperwork and filing that stuff. There's definitely still room for more traditional business people as well.
Really interesting. Let's kind of switch topics a little bit. I noticed that you're an angel investor. You've been acquired. You've kind of been through this process before. Can you talk about the actual acquisition process, getting acquired, and what type of things you focus on as an angel investor if you were going to invest in someone's company? I know you your most recent one was Phoenix Nuclear Labs with Dr. So a couple things. So I've been at this point I'm in my kind of almost mid 40s, and I've been in this kind of startup game for 20-ish years. And I've been at companies that took big rounds and exploded. I've been at companies that couldn't raise revenue, couldn't raise funds. I've just a couple months ago, we took a couple $1 million of a VC Series A for this Tetra defense company. And then I've written some checks too. And I've been at a bunch of different sides of this table. And, it's everything is human. It's always human relationships. And, I don't know. A lot of times when I'm talking to people, it's like, oh, how does that all work? And it's just a bunch of humans that have different roles, all meeting each other, liking each other, and, sometimes walking a path together. And so it all starts with those human relationships. And then obviously a whole bunch of stuff needs to be true. But when I'm looking at a company to make an angel investment, and again, I'm a human who's interested in science. So I'm never going to invest in like a TikTok type of thing. Sure.
Right? Because it's just not that interesting to me. Even though there's probably a ton of money to be made when you invest in that type of social media, whatever. It's just not my thing. I'm not that interested in it. I like to invest in companies where there's going to be a huge barrier of entry for somebody else because something's really freaking complicated and you need a bunch of like PhD level geniuses to do something about it. That's the type of story that I get all fired up about. As a non-PhD genius, like I am fascinated by what these folks can do. Like one of my recent ones was a company called Allergy Amulet, where me and a group of investors kicked a bunch of money in to a company that they make this little amulet that you wear on your neck, and you can take these little test strips and stick it in your food or stick it in your liquid, and then you can stick it into this thing and it will Bluetooth to your phone and tell you whether or not it has any peanut allergens in it.
Huh.
It's
Oh, wow.
freaking
Cool.
crazy. And it's not just the peanuts. It's like, I think they've got like 30 or 40 other allergens. And I was like, wow, like that's freaking magic, right?
Well,
Yeah,
I've
that's really
seen
cool.
one similar with diabetes where they've got this little patch they wear on their arm, and it keeps their blood sugar regulated, and it shows that their readings on their phone without, the pricks. And I always thought that, damn, like my dad's diabetic, and in the 90s or whatever, when he got diagnosed, if something like that existed, could have changed his entire game plan. And
Yep.
I love the advance of tech in the health industry for stuff like that. And this allergy one is just, I love that stuff. I think it's
me too. So Phoenix turned into Shine. So Phoenix is a company. Again, the guy I started Gillware with is this guy, Greg Pfeiffer, and he's like literally Elon Musk level genius. I mean, no exaggeration. And he invented this thing called a flame device that would generate like a neutron beam of like higher flux than like a nuclear reactor.
Oh, wow.
And I had no idea why you would want to do such a thing. And I'm not even sure he did, but he could do it because it was in his brain, and he did it. And it turns out you can do all kinds of amazing stuff with it. If you go to like phoenixwi.com, you can see all kinds of the stuff they do. And one of the things they can do is something called Neutron Radiography. So what I learned as part of this business venture is that when we get on an airplane, not that anybody's doing that right now, but next time we get in that airplane, there's these huge engines, and they got hundreds of these little turbine blades that spin, right? And they spin so fast that they'd melt.
Oh, wow.
And then we die.
Right.
So they're hollow, and they're air cooled. So that thing's always pushing air through them to make sure that they don't melt. And if there's a tiny, like smaller than a BB piece of ceramic stuck inside that blade as part of that manufacturing process, we're all going to die, or at least one engine's going to go. And that pilot will probably sell you Sullenberger wherever you need to be, but it would be a bad situation. So boy, it'd be nice to be able to see inside that damn thing to know if it's clean or not. It's a big problem because you can't really X-ray it, because X-ray is really bad at seeing stuff, low density stuff behind high density stuff. So if you want to take an X-ray of something, behind a piece of sheet metal, you're going to have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to go that great. But you can do neutron radiography, and neutrons are great at this. So if you go to phoenixwi.com, you can see pictures of some of this stuff where you can see inside these turbine blades, and you can see this low density stuff behind the high density stuff. And it turns out they've been doing this since they've been basically building turbine blades.
Wow.
They ship them to nuclear reactors. And they hold them, or a lot of times it's like a research reactor, but they'll use the neutrons coming off of these reactors to do this process. But now they just built a place called PNIC in Fitchburg, Wisconsin, which is about 20 miles from where I am, where there's no nuclear reactor in Fitchburg, Wisconsin. And you can actually just ship these little turbine blades to this place in Wisconsin and do that same radiography. It's amazing.
That's crazy.
The other thing that they can do is they can make medicine. So what Shine Medical Technologies, they are, so they've probably raised like $300 million of VC at this point. It's kind of a crazy, crazy company. They're actually like pouring concrete on a first of its kind medical isotope production facility in Janesville, Wisconsin right now. And they use these neutron beams to shoot at certain types of elements. And then some stuff happens, and then it turns into a different element, and that element is medicine.
Huh.
Oh, wow.
So it also turns out that this was happening, you guessed it, in these nuclear reactors. So there were all these nuclear reactors where we produced this Moly-99 or technetium that if I had like a shooting pain in my arm, and they thought, oh crap, Brian's having a heart attack, which I'm definitely going to have someday. and you go to that ER, they're gonna shoot you up with some of this radioactive stuff, and then they're gonna take a picture of your heart. And it's that radioactive signature that gives them that picture of what's happening, so they know if they got to take me in for surgery, they got to put in a stent, or oh, he's good.
Well, can't they actually track it through your body as they shoot it? They can actually follow where it's going.
That's what, and what they're following is that radioactive stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's a whole area of nuclear medicine.
That's so crazy.
Where, cool. Even if you're just going to like, oh, I'm having some stomach pain, they can feed you some of this radioactive stew and you could just eat it, and then they can just watch your body digest it and say, oh, yep, his intestines suck and they need to get removed or whatever. I'm not a doctor, but
what?
But anyways, like so this stuff is insane. But again, it's the perfect amount of radiation. So this Moly 99, Tech 99, it's like a little bit of radiation. Mm-hmm. It's enough where they can see the picture of your heart, but you won't die of cancer, probably.
And this was all developed by Greg Pfeiffer. So
this stuff's been around for 40 years, this Moly stuff, but they currently make it, or they were making it at these nuclear reactors. And some of those nuclear reactors were like 50 plus years old, fell offline, and then the North American supply chain was gone. And then a bunch of people died. So the federal government said, oh crap, the Department of Health, or no, the Department of Energy, the NRC, they said, is there anybody who can figure out how to make this medicine without a nuclear reactor? Because that would be great, because we haven't built one in this country for like 40 years. And Greg was like, oh yeah, that's easy. So at the time we were running, like, Phoenix was like a 10-person company, and we were making this neutron gun, and we applied for this $25 million federal grant for the DOE. And the biggest surprise of all is that we won.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Now you actually got to do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, and he was up against like some of the biggest behemoths in medicine, huge publicly traded companies with tens of thousands of employees. And, little Greg Pfeiffer in, Middleton, Wisconsin won. It's kind of a crazy situation.
That is crazy. So we're actually kind of getting there on time almost. We usually go about an hour, but before we close up, I have one more topic I kind of want to bring up, and that kind of relates to the current COVID situation and how we all kind of have to work from home. And on the security side of things, we've all heard about like the Zoom bombs and people hacking into Zoom calls. Can you talk about a few different ways that we can make our calls more secure and prevent that from happening?
So yeah, I mean, biggest thing is patch your Zoom. I mean, and this is a trend. This is how things work. These technology trends emerge. Bad guys figure out holes and how to penetrate those things. And then those companies, if they're good, patch those problems. As consumers, the number one most important thing we can do is pay attention and patch. And that means your iPhone, that means if you're sitting here and you got a Windows box and you've had 370 security updates that you haven't installed, you're a bad human and you need to install those damn things, because there's a reason that they supplied those patches, and I know people that are like 13 patches behind on their iOS device.
Well, okay, so let's go down that road, because I'm guilty of that. Mainly for me, I'm always scared that if I update my software or my the latest iOS or whatever is going to crash my Pro Tools or my Serato for DJing or this or that. Every time I upgrade, it crashes 8 other things. So I always kind of sit in the behind scenes, wait for everyone else to do it. Once I find out that it's stable, then I do it.
The same thing happens in corporate America. Okay. So 20 years ago, when I was in like big corporate America in IT groups, this same thing would happen, where Microsoft would come out with a patch for Windows Server 2000 or NT4. They'd come out with a patch for it because there was a security problem. And as a IT guy, one of my jobs was to say, okay, let's go in and test all 37 of these business applications and make sure what Microsoft did isn't going to screw everything up. So there's always this lag, even as a consumer, as a business, behind that curve. The threat and the bad stuff that's going to happen to you if you don't patch has never been like this. It used to be okay to be 3 months behind the curve. Take your time, make sure everything's going to work. These days, you need to patch and then deal with the problems.
That's crazy.
And if you don't, that innocuous, link that you click in a browser, sometimes these exploits are so bad, you don't even have to do anything wrong. Okay? Just getting a text, not even reading it, not even clicking the link. I mean, there's been problems where if you just get a text of a certain type with some really nasty stuff in it, boom, your phone is rooted.
Is there a way to tell if your phone's rooted or your computer's rooted? Is there any way to kind of just, wipe the slate and start clean?
Well, that's the way to prove it. I
suppose the patching will solve some of this, right? So if you did get hacked or rooted,
it's an easy, free thing. Okay, so this is the thing: we need to do cheap and easy things to stay out of major pain, right? Before we can even worry about the advanced stuff. Patch your things. Your data needs to get backed up in an automated way, without you doing anything, to a different network with a different layer of network authentication. And your backup, like everything else, needs to have multi-factor authentication to get into it. Otherwise, the bad guys who broke into your system to ruin your life are going to have an easier time getting into your backup to destroy it, to make sure that you're going to pay them that $50,000 ransom.
So okay. The multi-factor process, is that, when you log into Dropbox and you have to turn that donkey to the right side, is that what you're talking about? Yeah, you need
again, it's a username and a password is kind of people's first layer of authentication usually.
Yeah.
It's not good enough. That was the way that we did things 20 years ago. It's not good enough, not even close to being good enough these days. I mean, you need multiple other factors. So some people say two-factor authentication, where you might add a donkey or you might add a rotating code on a smartphone.
Yeah.
But, again, for all of our systems, we're going to have 3, 4, 5 factors of authentication. And if this sounds super scary, I've got a little thing in my hand. It's called a YubiKey.
Yeah.
And this little thing costs about $40. You can get it on eBay, or you can get it on Amazon. You probably get a used one on eBay. And these things, this will do a lot of this stuff for you, where you can do this passwordless authentication, works on your phone, works on your computer, and you need to have this key to log in.
Yeah, Pro Tools
comes with a trade-off.
Like
if I don't have this key, I'm screwed.
Yeah.
So there's trade-offs to all the security stuff, slight inconveniences for all the security stuff. So buy a YubiKey, back your data up to something with two-factor so that it's really a legitimate backup. Test it occasionally. Once every 6 months, go up to your backup, log into it, make sure all your important stuff is there. Because you wouldn't believe how many of our customers at the Recovery Lab thought they had a backup, but their QuickBooks wasn't on it, or their Pro Tools wasn't on it, or that book they were working on for some reason wasn't on it, right? You have to actually make sure that your backup has it and that it's going to be there for you when you need it. So user authentication, backup, network security. If you're at home and you basically have your internet plugged into your cable modem, that's absolutely no. Yeah. You need a firewall.
Yeah.
And then my mother-in-law will say, well, I have a Windows firewall. That's not a firewall. I'm sorry, Bill Gates. It's not. It's you need a piece of hardware in between you and the internet for your basic sanitation.
Pretty much just your wireless router with a password on it's your firewall, right? Because I'm not an IT guy. I don't,
So mine at home is, again, I don't know where it is. So I run like this is a Eero mesh network, and that mesh network is what I talk through, and I pay Eero and this is consumer level stuff, but right now I'm kind of at home in my consumer mode, right?
Sure.
So I have that thing set up to do the Eero rule set, which is basically nobody else on the internet can just come ping my IP addresses on my desktop.
Sure.
The Eero is going to,
yeah,
you need to get past that piece of hardware that's sole purpose in life is to deny requests from the Ukraine.
Sure.
I can't talk to the Ukraine unless I initiate it from my computing devices. Okay? If you just bare ass yourself on the internet, you're in for a bad time these days.
Yeah, and the sad part is, I would say that probably 50 or 60% of the people using the internet don't know that.
Well, and again, and the telecom companies that provide these cable modems, they also know that, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not going to sit here and say that the Charter Internets of the world and the other, large telecommunications companies aren't trying to do some of these basics. But boy, I don't really want to be reliant on some big conglomerate cable company for my security when I can spend $100 and get a piece of hardware in between me and that internet. And if they're trying to, great. And then I'm also going to run AV. I'm also going to back up my data. I'm also going to have multi-factor everywhere, and this is part of the problem though. There's so much crap to think about. You don't want to, if you're hearing all this, like, oh, geez, I'm never going to do all that. Okay. Well, then just buy a backup of any kind. Spend $50 a year and buy a Carbonite for all I care. Just anything where it's going to take your data, back it up, set up two-factor everywhere, two-factor on your Facebook, two-factor on your Gmail, two-factor on your backup. Buy that doohickey, get away from that same crappy password that you use for everything for 20 years, because that password's no good anymore. Okay? If your password's like the name of your kid and like the number of the house you grew up on,
it's been cracked. Yeah.
It's been cracked, or somebody could crack it in like a minute. Okay. The amount of information about you that's out there publicly available where you could build this dictionary style hack for your passwords is amazing. So, get away from passwords with these little doohickeys, back your data up, set up your two-factor, and you're going to be better off than 99% of humans.
Yeah.
Just those three things.
That's crazy. Well, cool. So Brian, as we come to an end here, can you just let people know where they can learn more about the work that you do, the type of services that you offer, and how they can get in touch with you? Sure.
Yeah. So I'm on LinkedIn. So if you Google for Brian Gill on LinkedIn for Gillware, I'll pop right up. Go ahead, connect with me there. If you're like, man, I'm a small business owner and I really want to get more serious about my security, but I'm a non-technologist. We just worked with another buddy of mine to produce essentially a questionnaire, a way for you to help hire a managed service provider. It's free, it's ungated. So if you Google for Gillware and MSP buying guide, that's a tool to help you interview your local IT people that can come in and do some of these things for you. Because so many people have no idea even how to interview somebody to do that for them.
Sure.
And if
not even know what they need in the first place.
They don't even know the questions to ask.
Yeah.
So it's free, it's ungated. You can just go to Gillware and download it. So that's just a nice free resource. And if you ever lose all your data to a clicking hard drive, Gillware.com, Gillware. If you're a mid-sized company looking for risk assessment help, go to tetradefense.com.
Awesome.
Great. Cool. Well, Brian, thank you so much once again for your time and everything. This has been really informational, lots of cool stuff going on. And I really appreciate some of the insights on these things. I think most of us don't know what we don't know. So it's really helpful to get this kind of perspective. So thank you.
Gentlemen, love the show. Thanks for your time. Thanks for keeping this free flow. And
absolutely,
it's cool. Much better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, cool. Well, thanks so much to everybody who tuned in this week and every week. And we'll see you next time.